Now, many of you will be aware that in recent months we've held a Bible study with the students that have connected with us over the past year. And the last Bible study we looked at was based around the film Les Miserables. So I know a few of you have seen it because I've chatted to you about it, but put your hands up if you've seen it and then I'll know roughly. Yeah, so maybe about half, yeah? That's okay. So, it was a really good time and really valuable as we reflected on what Scripture says about the injustices in the world. Because for those who've seen it, the title is pretty obvious of the musical, the story, the film, however you've seen it. It's about miserable people, really, going through, really bad times, and there's a lot of injustice in the film. But one character is Jean Valjean, and he's kind of one of the main characters that appears, and he's right there from the beginning. We meet him in slavery, in prison. He's been there 19 years, and that's how the story begins, really, with him. He was put in prison for stealing a loaf of bread for his nephew, who was starving, in a place, in a society where the rich got richer and the poor got very poor. It was scum of the earth poor, that treated like not even human beings. And he tried to run away, so he didn't get in prison for 19 years. But he served his time, and he comes out of prison. But he's malnourished, he's unidentifiable as himself, and actually he answers to a number, 24601, rather than his own name. He's completely lost who he is, he has no identity. When he's released, he has to carry his papers around with him, which say his crime, and those papers stop him being able to connect with anything. He can't get a job, he can't do anything, and it's all just for stealing one loaf of bread. This man is a figure of injustice, who becomes a victim of his own circumstance. He looks like a prisoner, and absolutely nobody has any interest in helping him try to rebuild his life. He ends up at a monastery because it's the only place that will take him. The church is the only place of sanctuary for him. And they treat him like a person. They give him a meal, they give him a warm bed, they give him something to drink. He's not just a number in that church. On his departure, rather than saying thank you, he decides to live up to his name and his crimes, and he steals from the monastery. He steals silver in a bid, I think, to try and make somewhere in his own life. And he's caught by the local constabulary, and he's returned and he's going to go back to prison because of the crime he's committed. But the priest pardons him. And actually, rather than the bishop calling him out for his crimes and saying, how dare you, I was kind to you, and he slammed the door in my face, basically, the bishop gives him some candlesticks, which is probably the most valuable thing they own, and they give it to him so he can start his life afresh. One man's act of grace then leads Jean Valjean, this other man, to leave his entire past behind. As he runs out of the monastery, he tears up his papers, which is again another crime, but we won't go there. But he leaves it all behind. He goes and becomes a new person, and the money that he gets from the silver and the candlesticks makes a new life for him, and that's the rest of the story. And the words from the song, from the musical says, and so the story must begin. From that moment, from that act of grace, Jean Valjean's story really does begin. Now you could easily substitute Rahab into the story of Les Mis. Like Valjean, Rahab is on the edge of society looking in. She's quite literally, because she lives in the city walls, which means she wouldn't have been a favourable person to live amongst the people within the city. She's literally living in the wall. So she's hiding in the wall. She has a house, but she's on the edge. She's not a favourable lady. She doesn't have the best of occupations. And she's a liar. We know that from the story because she blatantly lied to the faces of the messengers that the king sent to ask about the spies. And yet, it is God that chooses to use her to fulfill his promise to the Israelites, and that they'll enter into the promised land and inherit the place that God has given to them. And after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, we all know the Exodus story, don't we? She is the means by which the story of God's faithfulness and hope and future really does begin. Her story is only found in Joshua chapter 2, and we don't actually learn all that much about her, really, do we? We know her occupation, we know where she lives, and we know her name, but that's literally it. But in that whole chapter, she's the only person we actually learn anything about. We don't learn the name of the spies, we don't even know who the king of Jericho was. They're not significant to the story. The story is about Rahab and how God uses her. A female sex worker living on the edge of society, and she's the one that gets given a name. Because her story is one that is meant to be told. So just to recap that story, because the Bible reading was very long, Rahab welcomes two spies into her house, and she hides them away whilst the king's messengers come to search for them. She blatantly lies and says that they weren't there, they've gone. So technically that's probably treason as well, if we're going to put that one in there. But she agrees to help overthrow the king of Jericho and to take over the land in the acts that she does. So it's only a small thing she does, but it makes a massive difference. And obviously we know the story of the Battle of Jericho as well. I think everybody in the world probably knows that story. But like Valjean, Rahab seems to have this ability to just dig herself a bigger and bigger hole. She does herself no favours at all. But from verse 9 we perhaps see why it is and what her motivation is for doing so. Rahab has heard all about the God of the Israelites, and she's scared, she's fearful of this God. She knows the wonders and the miracles, and that this God is the God in heaven and on earth. And she wants to be in his favour. She doesn't want to be on the wrong side of this God. And so she agrees to help the spies in return for the lives of herself and her family. And in return, she inherits a future in the promised land. We fast forward a few thousand years, and Rahab's name appears in the direct lineage of Jesus, which is the ultimate fulfilment of that promise for us all, isn't it? That future hope that we have. The whole world redeemed. And Rahab is part of that story. Hebrews 11:31, who acknowledges as a person of significance. It says this: by faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed in the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. She's listed as a hero of the faith. She was a complicated person, wasn't she? We've said a few things that maybe weren't in her favour, but God chose to use her anyway. Valjean the thief, Rahab the prostitute. You could fill in the blanks with maybe other people that you know who could fit into that category. We all know people living complicated lives. I think if you think about it now, you could think of somebody whose circumstances just lead you to despair, I guess. You don't know what else to do. In most cases, people are either trying to find their way and just seem to keep digging themselves a hole, or they're not even trying to fit in, they're just doing their own thing. But just because they're on the edge doesn't mean God doesn't have something for them. Doesn't mean God doesn't want to use them. Doesn't mean God doesn't have a hope and a future for them. It also tells us that it's not that God might use them to teach us something about him, as he does with Rahab. He might even use them to fulfill the plan that he's got in mind. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear about some of the situations of people in our society, I despair. I think, what on earth can we do to help that situation? I don't know what to do, but my heart does desperately want to know. I'd love to fix everybody's problems in the world that ever existed. But we can't, can we? We can't. But thank the Lord that transformation from any situation and from the things that we think are beyond repair, he's the one that does those things. Those stories of redemption, of future, of promise, they don't come from us. They come from God, don't they? He's the one that heals, redeems, and restores. And each of us in this room should be able to testify to that for ourselves. The reality is that with each of these people, God finds a way to put them in the path of others who will help them. Valjean found help, forgiveness and grace in the bishop. Rahab finds kindness and a pardon and a future through the spies. Romans 5:8 reminds us that whilst we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't wait till we completely sorted ourselves out and stopped digging ourselves holes, stopped being complicated, misunderstood, or even marginalised people. He died anyway, forgave us anyway, and redeemed us anyway. Luke chapter 7 verses 44 to 47 reminds us of yet another woman in society who acts in such a way that she's spoken about for generations to come. We all know the woman at the well, right? That's what that passage is for. Because of her, because of the woman at the well, there in the middle of the day, because she wasn't accepted in society because of the way she was living, because of her, an entire village comes to know the good news about Jesus. And most of them become followers of him. We'll see about that later on in the New Testament. All through one sinner, on the edge, drawing water from a well, and all it took was for Jesus to find her in that moment. And so our response then as Christians should be to acknowledge that we cannot predict or dictate where God is at work. We've had a few examples this morning of the fact that God will do unpredictable things with people that we maybe don't know how to even begin, and yet God just knows. But what we can do is act as Jesus would to those in front of us, to just be Jesus to those in front of us. Perhaps those who get missed because they're on the edge, and to those who God places in our path. Just think for a moment of the invisible people that you just get so used to seeing day in, day out, or the stories you hear day in, day out that we've almost become desensitised from their situations. To those people on the edge, we just simply need to allow them to be seen, to be heard, to be loved and redeemed, to be given a name. Our call as Christians in this broken world is to love people like Jesus. It's so simple, isn't it? We love so many things. Can we love people like Jesus? And that's regardless of the situation they're in, their complexities, how many times they redig themselves a hole. I'm pretty sure that when the bishop opened his home to Valjean, and the spies, when they set out on their journey, I'm pretty sure they would have had no intention at all in going to those places where God was at work, in being in those situations that they find themselves in. And so as we take time today to reflect on where God is placing us as a church, and where God is asking us to go out to as a church, and how we can respond as a people to those on the edge of this city. I wonder what opportunities and transformations that God already has in mind. That, as they often say, mission lingo, which is ultimately what we're about, God is simply inviting us to join in with. And so today, will you join in with me in praying for the privilege to participate in what God has for us to do?